Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started, even though Reese and Avery, it's just the two of you. I know that Claire's at basketball today, and I hope that we have Morgan and Isaac show up here in a little bit. And if not, I'll make sure that they get a tape of this. But so anyway, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So it'll be just like the four of us. So we'll have to see how we do. So on how we do it. Well, why don't we start? So we'll just kind of share highs and lows. So Avery, you get to start. What's your high and low for the week?
So my high was I didn't have to do any tests for school this week.
Ooh.
Or any like seminars.
Nice.
And then the low was our dog had to get a haircut, and she's less fuzzy now.
She's less fuzzy now. You liked her fuzzy?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was soft.
Okay. Reese, how about
a high for me, it's kind of for Kona, but like she got a new brush and she likes it more than her other one.
Okay.
And I do not have a low.
Okay. Good. Pastor Nahali?
I don't think everything was just okay for me. I don't think I have a high and a low for this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Although a low was probably, by the way, if you tried to watch the service at all this morning, a low was trying to figure out our Facebook problems at the beginning of service. You saw, okay, Avery, you saw, okay.
Yes,
we're having real problems
right now, the frustration of trying to get it to work.
Yes. So Sam was not here today. So our resident expert was not here today. So that was kind of interesting. So I'm just trying to think of a high this week. Another low I had was that we've had some people that have been in the hospital this week. We keep finding people that are having some problems at church, some older folks. So that's kind of a low. But I'll say a high is just like the really beautiful weather we've been having for the last couple of days. So that's been nice. So although I'm kind of glad it was sunny when we did service, because now it's cloudy. So we'll have to see what happens from here. So, but and then if Morgan and Isaac get on, we'll have to ask them about their highs and lows. But let's get to the questions a little bit. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons I wanted to ask you the questions I did of you this past week and talking with your parents is because when we talked about Exodus last week, Exodus is, we think that especially the beginning of the Bible was stuff they were stories that kept on being passed down. So parents would tell their kids, and they would tell all the kind of community around them. They would pass down these stories over and over again. And these were the stories that were the most important stories for them. So when they would tell and retell this story of the Exodus and how God set the Hebrew people free, this was like a really important story for them. And it wasn't just important for them, but it was important for all, it became important for a lot of other people later on, because people would keep retelling these stories to say how important it was about what God did in their lives. So I thought, hey, this is a way that you get a chance to hear some of the stories that your parents found important, that they know about from your family. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I'll add in stuff from Claire that I have from Claire, and Pastor Nahali and I. Pastor Nahali doesn't know this yet. She's going to have to answer these questions too. So we'll all deal with them together. So one of the things when I thought about Exodus, I thought, here's a good way to think about it. Think of when you asked the question about your parents' family, was there a story that got told and retold again in there? So I know I just had your questions up. So Avery, you're going to have to read me your answer. So Reese, talk to me about what you interviewed your dad. So talk a little bit about what your dad said were the stories that got told and retold.
It wasn't really a story, it's just something that like got passed down. It was playing cards and dice with family.
Okay. So that was a real important part of family, was playing cards and playing dice?
Yeah.
Okay. And Avery, what about your mom?
So mine wasn't really a story, but it's like what the stories are about and stuff. So I said, in our family, we tell stories all the time, and they're usually funny stories.
Funny stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those are always kind of the fun. I mean, it's always the funny stories that are kind of important, right? Let me tell you. Can I tell you a story? I always remember my mom telling me. My mom grew up in what's now Pakistan, is now India, because her dad was a missionary, and she always would tell. The one story I remember her saying is she lived in this big house, and it had those stairways, with the big banister, the banister where you would run your hand down along the banister along there. And so she and her sister would love to run their hand down the banister of the thing. And so she talked about how, and they would do this day or night. So especially at night, they would like walk down in the dark, and they would run their hands down the banister as they walked down the stairs. So my mom would always tell the story about how she and her little sister were going down the stairs, and they were running down their hand down the banister, when as they ran down their hand down the banister moved, because on the banister was a snake. So they were running their hands on a snake, and they talked about how scared they were, and they ran down the stairs, but fortunately nothing happened. So that's like a story I always remember that my mom would always tell. Pastor Nyahali, what about you?
Hold up. I got you. Okay, good. Now I come back. They would always tell, my parents would always tell stories about when they were young and the things they did. My dad would always talk about going fishing with his dad.
Okay.
How he always looked forward to that. That's the time he used to spend with his dad, and he loved that. And one day, I think he went and he caught no fish. And I think they went a couple of days continuously, and his dad was catching fish, but he caught no fish. And his dad said, well, today, he said, last day his dad said, well, today, let's see what you can do. I'm not fishing, you do it, and let's see what you do, or else you're not gonna have dinner today. And he thought his dad was pretty serious about it. And he said he was crying the whole time because he couldn't catch fish.
So he thought he wasn't going to get dinner, and it was all his fault. Is that it?
Yes.
Well, that's good. Okay. So what about Reese and Avery? What did your parents tell you about when you were born, and when you were a baby, or when you were a little kid?
I go first.
Sure.
Okay. So the story when I was born was my aunt came just before I was born, and she got stuck in traffic, but my mom didn't know. And then she just got to the hospital right before I was born.
Right before you were born. Okay. Okay. How about you, Reese?
Mine was that they were surprised that my hair was so dark.
Oh yeah, that was another one for mine.
The hair was
Really? So your hair was really dark too, huh, Avery?
No, my hair was really light.
Your hair was really light. Okay.
Yeah. And my mom said that the doctor was like, you will never believe what color her hair was. And then they saw my bright blonde hair.
Have you ever seen the child, though, that there are some babies I know that sometimes their hair comes in really dark when they're born and then comes out blonde?
Yeah.
I've seen some little babies in which they haven't cut the baby's hair yet, and so it looks like they tinted their hair because they're blonde with this little black thing on the bottom. Now I happen to know that Pastor Nyahali has a story about when she was born that you guys I don't think have heard yet. So Pastor Nyahali, you have to tell your birth story.
Well, when I was born, I was the fourth child, and my parents already had 2 girls and a boy. And they wanted another boy so that they could even it out and just have 4 kids. And so they really were expecting a boy. And my dad was out of the country when my mom was, when I was born. So when they called him to give him the news that I was born, they just told him, they said, oh, your wife gave birth. And his response was, he didn't want to say, is it a boy? Because he knew he was expecting a boy. His response was, is it a girl again? And they said yes. And that's what he named me in our language, Mendi. It means, my name means, Nyahale means, is it a girl? It's actually, is it a girl again? So it's Nyahale Boma. Boma means again. So Nyahale means, is it a girl? So
If you ever want to know where Nyahale comes from, Nyahale means it's so. Now people remember that, Avery and Reese, people remember that story so much that when Nyahale was here as our vicar, as our intern, I remember when we went and there was someone that was really dear that Pastor Nyahale knew that was a part of the church, and it was when Angie Chapman ended up having a stroke. An older woman in the church had a stroke and died. When I was in the emergency room, her granddaughter that would only come to church with her occasionally talked about wanted to make sure that I got a hold of our intern. She would say, the one whose name means, is it a girl? So she couldn't remember Nyahale's name, but she remembered the, is it a girl? So,
is it a girl?
But, so yeah, I was gonna say, and the only thing I can tell you about when I was born, that my mom would always talk about the fact that my mom ended up having a tumor. It was not a cancerous tumor, but there was a tumor that was in her stomach. So she always talked about how they took me out with her tumor. So I was little because of it.
Wow.
So, and let's see. So Claire has down that when she was born. Now I would really love to hear more about this. So we're gonna have to ask Claire about this. She said, when I was born, I got into a fight with the nurse cleaning me up. So I wonder what that means as a little baby, how Claire got into a fight with that one. So okay, so you guys gave some things. I want to change this a little bit, okay? Because I know you asked your parents once, so not going through all the questions, but I know you asked about rules. Now, your parents had rules growing up, but I want you to think about your rules for a minute. So Avery and Reese, okay, so you're both coming from the same family here. So tell me, what is a rule that you all know that you have in your family?
We're only supposed to be on electronics for an hour in the weekday and 2 hours on the weekends.
Okay. An hour on the weekday and 2 hours on the weekend. Okay. Reese, what other rules do you have at home?
Doing chores.
Doing chores. Okay. So like Reese, what chores do you have?
Like laundry, taking out the trash, gathering the trash. Yeah, cleaning my room.
Dusting stuff.
That's not really a job for just me, but yeah.
Okay. Avery, do you have anything different or is it the same ones?
It's the same ones, but we also do the dishes.
Do the dishes? Okay.
And sometimes I take Kurt on a walk too.
Okay.
He takes her on a walk too.
Now, when you answered this question, the one question I asked you, how did your parents answer when you asked them just a simple question about why do we have rules or laws? Oh, wait a minute. Here comes Isaac. Hold on a minute. We'll bring Isaac on here. Let's see when he's on.
And field elevation.
Hey, Isaac.
Good afternoon.
Hey, we're just going over some of the questions that you asked your parents. And so Isaac, let me ask you, I was just asking the question, I know some of the questions I asked had to do with what rules your mom had when she was growing up, but what rules do you have at home, Isaac? What sort of rules does your mom give you?
to clean up my room, and I can't play my video game on the weekdays.
Okay.
And
Okay. Okay. Good. And
that's
so,
it.
so Isaac, I'll go ahead since you're on right now. I'll have you answer the question, then we'll have Avery and Reese answer this question. So when you asked your mom, why do we, I mean, and it could be in your family and it could be just with in general, but when you asked your mom about why do we have rules? Why do we have rules, Isaac?
Um, uh, my mom just said we have rules. Well, I have rules because to keep everything in like what's that word? In like I can't think of it right now.
Okay, keep in order. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. So Avery and Reese, how about you?
So my mom said that rules and laws, we have them because so people stay safe, so you can stay in order.
Okay.
And she said that she thinks they are written down so everyone knows what they are and they're aware of them.
Okay. Reese?
I said to keep the house neat for like the house rules, and
Okay.
then for the laws, I said to keep everyone safe.
Okay. Keep everyone safe. Good. Well, and that's kind of a little bit I'm looking at because I know, like I said, Claire can't be here today, but Claire, when she wrote down hers, she said, you know, we have rules to keep us safe and orderly and talk to, you know, this is from her mom and about being respectful. So that's good. And the reason why I want to talk about that is that, okay, so let me share something with you. Okay. Let me see. I keep on trying to use the mouse on my computer when I'm on a different computer. And so I have to get the right one. So I want to show you something. So I'm going to share with you a timeline. Okay. So I know that it's really hard to see a lot of this, and this is just a really general timeline, but this is, if you want to see kind of a Bible at the glance, this is the Bible at a glance on all this. Now, we got taken up to part of the Moses story last week, right in here. So when we talked about Genesis, we talk about this whole thing here when we talk about this first part of Genesis. So anything from how the world was created and, you know, that we read about, and then there's Adam and Eve, and there's Noah's Ark and all that. That's stuff we call prehistory. And when I say prehistory, I mean it's things that really happened before there was a history. And they're stories. They're meant to tell us about what's important. And it's not necessarily that these really happened, but there's stories about it. So when we start going into the main stories that were important, we start talking about, in Genesis, it talked about Abraham, and then he has a son Isaac, and then there's Jacob, and then there's Joseph. So we have that. And then with the story of Jacob and Joseph, they move down to Egypt. They become slaves in Egypt. And then we hit the story of Moses. And so here's the Old Testament books right here that we list what is called the law, and it's Genesis. The ones that I want you to memorize, and we're going to go over those in just a minute in terms of this. And here's my thing. It's going to be really hard for me to do something today, but I'm going to try because, okay, you see, we've kind of been through a little bit of this. We especially did Genesis and Exodus. So I'm trying to get you through today in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to try to talk very briefly about things from about the middle of Exodus all the way through. So you have Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, then up here, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel. I'm trying to get you into 1st and 2nd Samuel by the time we finish. And that's going to be really impossible, but we're going to do our best because we only have a limited amount of time to kind of talk about the Bible. But so I'm trying to get you from here to here, from where Moses is to this whole story of David and Solomon on all of that. So we're going to do our best on it. But one of the things that I started asking you about rules is because remember how Moses, we remember when I showed you that scene from I think I showed you the scene from the Ten Commandments last week of Moses parting the Red Sea, so they were able to escape from Egypt and escape all the Egyptians. When they make it to the other side, that's not the end of the story. That's really like the beginning of the story. Moses and the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, end up wandering around in the desert for 40 years. And part of the reason why is because it takes them a long time to understand who they are as a people. But that's a long time. So one of the big things that happens when they're out there is, and we hear about it, especially in Exodus chapter 20. Here's what I want you to do. You got your Bibles? You have your Bible? Okay. I want you to try to find Exodus 20. Remember, Exodus is the second book of the Bible. So this kind of helps on all of this. But find Exodus, and I want you to look at Exodus chapter 20. And let me know when you get there. You got it, Avery?
Yeah.
Okay.
21.
So in Exodus 20. Now I will tell you that after this part of Exodus, what ends up happening is the book of Exodus changes. Before you have a bunch of stories, but when it starts at Exodus 20, it starts changing. Because what happens is Moses goes up on top of a mountain, on top of what's Mount Sinai, and there God gives him rules, lots of rules. But the first set of rules are things that are kind of important that we're going to be talking about. And in fact, next year, we're going to be spending a lot more time on this one part of the rules. Because, okay, do you have a heading on Exodus 20? Sometimes, now this is not a part of the Bible when I look at it. So Avery, what does it say on the top of Exodus 20? What's the heading on it?
God gives his people the 10 commandments.
Okay, right. And Reese, does yours say the same thing?
Mhm.
Isaac, does yours say something similar to that too?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what we have in Exodus 20 is we have the 10 commandments. And this is something that next year, when we start talking about the small catechism, we're going to be talking more about the 10 commandments. But let's just read over this. So let's see. Now, I got to tell you that sometimes when you see different versions, especially in terms of how Lutherans talk about the 10 commandments, they divide it up just a little bit differently. So I'm going to read over these briefly. So in verse 2, it says, then God spoke all these words. So I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before you. In other words, only worship God. And then and I'm not going to read all. This is why I'm going to read this, just because there's a whole bunch of things. So then you have the next one. You shall not make for yourself an idol. An idol would be something that you would worship to represent God or another God. Don't worship an idol. Only worship God. Okay. And then you shall not make wrongful use. And this is verse 7. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. Or you might have, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now that can mean a couple of different things. Okay. Now, one of the things, in fact, who was it? Reese, I saw it with yours, right? Okay. One of the rules that your dad had growing up was no swearing, right? Okay. So one of the ways that's really simple on terms of taking God's name in vain is when we swear. You know, when you're saying Jesus Christ and you're not talking about Jesus, right? Or even saying, oh my God, that's taking God's name in vain. But it also means whenever, I think sometimes taking God's name in vain is when we blame God for things that we need to just blame ourselves for. That's a lot harder. So, but one way that you can think about it is think about not swearing, but also, don't make God responsible for things that you are. So these are all things about how we're supposed to treat God as something special. God's supposed to be something that we worship God and God alone. And then the next one is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, so anyone know, what do you think the Sabbath day was for the Jews, or is for the Jews? Do you know what day of the week it is? You can unmute yourself and tell me if you know. What you think, Isaac? What's the Sabbath day for the Jews?
Saturday.
Saturday. That's exactly it, because it's the seventh day of the week. Very good. Now, okay, so Reese, your turn on this one. What do we call the Sabbath day for ourselves?
I have no clue.
Okay, what day do we treat special as holy in the
Sunday.
week?
Sunday.
Sunday, yeah. So we now there are certain groups, certain Christian groups that will treat Saturday as special. There, in fact, there's a group called the Seventh-day Adventists. But it's saying set aside a day that you treat as special, and it's one where you rest, and it's one where you treat God as special. Now the reason why, as Christians, generally we tend to treat Sunday as the day is because Sunday is the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So we say we treat Sunday as a special day because of that. So, and then when you get into other rules, so if you keep going on the rules, I'm going to skip down to verse 12. Honor your father and mother. Okay. And then you shall not murder, or you shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. All right. You shall not commit adultery. Do you know what that means? Okay. No. Isaac, since I don't see you, what do you know what adultery means?
No.
No. Okay. Adultery means don't cheat on your husband or wife. That's the bottom line. Don't cheat on your husband or wife. If you're married, you should only be with the one you're married to. Cheating on your husband or wife is adultery. That's another word for it. I want to make sure, because I swear to you, this is true. I taught confirmation one time. When I asked them the question of what does adultery mean, there was someone in the confirmation class that said they thought it was when you became an adult. So that would be really embarrassing for you to say that to someone, okay? So that's why I want to make sure. Adultery means when you cheat on your husband or wife. Okay, then you shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. In other words, don't lie, okay? And then it's talking about covet. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. Covet means that you want it for yourself. You know, you look at your next door neighbor and say, ooh, I want what they have, instead of appreciating what you have. So these are the ones that we treat as 10 commandments, but there's actually a lot more laws. And the reason why I just want to talk about it is just like you talked about the fact that when you talked with your parents about you have rules to keep order, to keep you safe, so things can go right. God gave all these rules to the Hebrew people because he was trying, because it had been a long time since they were their own people. They were slaves, and the rules were meant to kind of help them to know who they were as God's people. And sometimes I think the whole reason that they had to wander around for 40 years in the wilderness is because it took them that long. Reese, what are you doing? You're making the light change on you. Yes, you are. I know what you're doing. Okay. But it took them 40 years to understand who they were as a people. And it was only after 40 years that they could come to that. So here's the thing. Now, I found this really great thing, and I am going to try to do something for you guys. So I want to show you something that kind of gives a summary of all the books of the Bible. And now my only problem with this, and so this kind of gives the books of the Bible, is there's some things that are on here that I want to change a little bit. So I'm going to try to do them up for you. So I just want to go through a couple things. So what I've just talked about, the wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, Moses giving people laws, lots of laws. In fact, the book of Leviticus that we talked about, the book of Leviticus basically is a whole bunch of laws. That's what it is. Deuteronomy is another book that kind of summarizes all the laws. It's not until you get to this book of Joshua, which is after, before this book of Joshua is where we start to get when they become a people. So Joshua is one of Moses's big commanders. Moses, when they come up, so if you kind of think about, you kind of know where is. In fact, the one thing I should have put up here is a map. Do you guys have a kind of a basic idea of where Israel is? Where Israel is today? Do you kind of have an idea about that? No? I'm going to have to come up with, let me see if I'm going to try something. Let me see if I can do this with you on here, okay? So I'm going to see if I can do this really quick. We're going to try to come up with an image for you. Let's see. Let me pull up this map right here. All right. So this map's not quite going to work. Anyway, this kind of shows you Europe right here. Well, this shows you Europe right here. I was hoping I could get a map. Let me see if I can pull up this one. Let's go back a minute. This shows you Israel right here. Down here is Egypt. What I showed you in terms of Europe, Europe's all the way up here. So when they wander in Egypt, they're right down here in Egypt. And when they're about to enter into Israel, actually they get really afraid to enter into Israel at first because they see a really great place to live, but they're afraid of the people that's there. And that's actually one of the reasons why they end up having to wander for 40 years is because they're afraid to go into the land. And so they enter into, when Joshua comes, and now let me see if I can get back to, I'm going to get rid of this a minute. When we get to the book of Joshua, this is after Moses dies. The whole book of Joshua tells about how they start going into to claim the land of Israel. In fact, one of the stories that's one of the famous stories about it is when they're going to attack this city called Jericho, that is this walled city. The story goes that the way that they end up destroying Jericho is they march around the city of Jericho for 7 days. And then the last day they march around Jericho 7 times. And when they blow their horns, the city falls down and they go into the land of Jericho. But the story of Joshua is this whole story about how they start going into the land. Now, just to give you an idea, I'm gonna just show you these single pages here. The next book after Joshua is Judges. And in the book of Judges, Judges is a whole book that talk about how long it takes for Israel, even though they've wandered around in the desert for 40 years, when they're in the land, it takes them a long time to understand who they are as a people, and especially because they don't have a king yet. And I'm going to skip the book of Ruth because this is a little book and it's just a short story on there. But it's not until we get into the books of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel that we start hearing about how they become the nation of Israel, how they end up getting a king to start with. And in fact, it all starts first. There's born, In fact, it's kind of, well, yeah, there's lots of stories I could tell, and I'm going to be skipping stories, but I'm going to try to get you to one story in particular that I want you to read. So here's what I want you to do. Now, I think you're going to need a table of contents, unless you know things, but let's do one thing first before we do this, because there's one story I want you all to know that we've read before, that you may have heard about. But how are you guys doing on the first 5 books? Do you have the first 5 books of the Bible memorized? Avery shaking her head, yes. So Avery, give me the first 5 books.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Okay. And Reese? Without
Genesis, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Okay. Isaac? Isaac, can you give me the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Isaac?
Isaac, are you there?
Isaac, you with us?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with
Okay. Can you give me the first 5 books of the Old Testament?
you. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers.
Okay. Yeah, and you named them all. It's actually Numbers and then Deuteronomy, but you got them all. That's great. That's great. And so now what I want you to try to do is I want you to try adding you all to name the next set of books that we're going to be talking about, okay? So and I know I just brought you through real quickly. And what I'll try to do is when I send your parents a sheet for you guys to do for the next time is I'm going to list the books that I want you to memorize, okay? So the next set of books I want you to try to get through is let me name them for you, okay? So Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, okay? Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now, here's what I want you guys to do. Get your Bibles open, and I want you to turn to the book of 1st Samuel, okay? And in 1st Samuel, I want you to be in chapter 17, okay? 1st Samuel 17. So while you guys look at that, I want to give you a little background on things here. So the people of Israel wanted to have a king. They're tired of not having a king. So they want to have a king. You guys can help. Reese and Avery, you're together. Hey, Reese, if your sister can help you, it's okay. So, but they wanted to have a king. And so the first king they get is Saul. But Saul doesn't do a really great job of being king. And so Samuel is a judge. And that's why Samuel's in here. Samuel is a judge. And Samuel ends up going to Saul and saying a new king is going to be chosen. And so he actually goes. And so in chapter 16, he goes to this house of a guy named Jesse. And Jesse has all these sons. And most of the sons, are older, and they're the ones that Samuel thinks, oh, this must be the one that God wants king, because they're older, they're stronger, they're better. But when it gets down to the last one that's there, God hasn't chosen any of them. And so Samuel ends up turning to Jesse. He says, is this it? Do you have any more sons? And he says, well, I got one more son, but he's out in the fields. He keeps watch over the sheep. And they said, well, bring him in. And that's David. And when David gets brought in, David gets anointed, and David is the one that gets chosen. Now, you don't hear anything more about David until we get to chapter 17, okay? So I'm just trying to think about where to start on this. So I'm going to start. So just so you know, so in case we come across some of these words on here, that you end up what ends up happening in chapter 17 is they're fighting another country called the Philistines. Okay, so the Israelites are fighting the Philistines, and they end up having this giant come up. And so here's what I want us to do. I'm going to start by reading verses 19 through 23. And then, let's see, I'll have one of you start at verse 24 and read through 27, okay? And I'll help you out with any words. In fact, Isaac, when I finish with verse 23, Isaac, I'll let you pick up at verse 24 and read through 27. And if we have different translations, know that the words may be slightly different, but we just go from there. And then Reese and Avery, I'll have you take the next few after that. So let me start at 19. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesus had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brother. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. And just so you know, I'm just trying to think. The words, I'm trying to think, I missed the words that he said, but anyway, Goliath just basically says he's a giant of a man, and he basically says that he's challenging anyone to come to him to fight with him, and whoever wins the fight wins the war. Okay, so Isaac, why don't you start verse 24 and read through verse 27?
Okay. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will always give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the man standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him. Whenever..."
Okay, you can stop right there. That's great. Great. Thank you, Isaac. And now let's skip a little bit, because then what David ends up doing is David ends up offering himself up. Now, he's not a soldier. All he's done is he's brought food for his brothers. And so initially the king says, "Why do you think you can do it?" And so the one thing that he ends up saying, I want to read this part, and then Avery and Reese, I'm going to have you guys read, is David says in verse 37, so we're going to jump down a little bit. He says, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Okay, so Avery, let me have you read verses 38 to 40.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Then Saul dressed David in his own military clothes. He put a coat of armor on him. He put a bronze helmet on his head. David put on Saul's sword over his clothes. He walked around for a while in all of that armor because he wasn't used to it. "I can't go out there in all of this armor," he said to Saul. "I'm not used to it." So he took it off.
Okay, and read verse 40 as well. Yep.
Okay. Then David picked up his wooden staff. He went down to a stream and chose 5 smooth stones. He put them in the pocket of his shepherd's bag. Then he took his sling in his hand and approached Goliath.
That's right. Okay. All right, Reese, I'm going to have you get on here. So read 41 to 47.
41. Okay. At that same time, the Philistine kept coming closer to David. The man who was carrying Goliath's shield walked along the front of him. Goliath looked at David over. He saw how young he was. He also saw how tanned and handsome he was, and he hated him. He said to David, "Why are you coming at me with sticks? Do you think I'm only a dog?" The Philistine called down curses on David. And in the name of his God, "Come over here," he said. "I'll feel your body to the birds of the air. I'll feed it to the wild animals." David said to Goliath, "You are coming to fight against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I'm coming against you in the name of the Lord, who rules over all. He's the God of the armies of Israel, and he is that one you have to dare to fight against. This very day the Lord will hand you over to me. I'll strike you down. I'll cut your head off this very day. I'll feed the bodies of the Philistine army to the birds of the air. I'll feed them to the wild animals. Then the whole world will know there is a God in Israel." Sorry, second one.
And read 47 as well. Yeah.
The Lord doesn't save by using a sword or a spear, and everyone who's here will know it is the battle. Will know it. The battle belongs to the Lord. He will hand all of you over to us.
Okay. And so Goliath's coming there, all dressed, decked out in armor. All that David has is his slingshot and his 5 stones. And he goes up there. And so I'll read the next part. When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. He put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. He grasped his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him. Then he cut off his head with it. So this is the story, and it's one of the most well-known stories about David. This is the story, and you may have known about it in other ways. This is the story of David and Goliath. And the reason why I wanted to hear this story, besides it's a famous story, is the fact that when we hear this story, this is a way of God saying that sometimes it doesn't seem like you can kind of feel, and maybe why I want to tell you this, is with Israel itself, as they were being formed, they didn't think they had that much, but God showed that he was with them every single time. And it's a way of saying to us, and this is where it's important for us, there's sometimes we feel like we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or we're not strong enough or athletic enough. But God says, I can take who you are and I can do great things with you. God was able to take David as he was and was able to defeat Goliath. And if God could use David to defeat Goliath, God can do fantastic things with every single one of you. That's why I wanted you to hear that story today, because I want you to hear that. And it's also kind of important. This is going to be the beginning. Later on, it's going to be King David. And King David doesn't always do everything right. He gets things wrong a lot more times than he gets things right. But God continues to use him. Now, when we get back to the story of the Old Testament, because we're going to, next month, so the next time we're going to meet, I think we're down for the second Sunday in December. So December 13th is when we're going to meet. And the reason is because we got Thanksgiving coming up and all that sort of fun stuff. But when we come back in December, we're going to take a break from the Old Testament and talk a little bit about preparing for the coming of Jesus. I mean, because we'll be in the middle of Advent and getting ready for the birth of Jesus. So we're going to talk a little bit. But when we come back to the Old Testament, we'll talk about what ends up happening with Israel. And like I said, I'm skipping over, but the one thing I hope to be able to have for you by the beginning of the year, in terms of in January, is that you can have some sheets that you can go over, that you can, if you ever wanted like a quick sheet to know what all these books of the Bible, because like I said, we're just kind of touching down. I'm trying to give you this great big overview, but you can touch down in these different books. But what I want you to do is to be able to have something that you can look at so you can know about them. So let's do this. What we're going to do, I want to thank you for coming. Know that I'm going to send something to your parents with some more questions to ask. And I'll also mention about what you need to memorize in terms of books of the Bible, because I want you to keep up with that. And we'll do this. Pastor Nahali, will you close us in prayer?
Gracious Lord, we thank you for this time we have spent with you and your children. We thank you for your grace and mercy. We thank you for all we have learned and all we are ready to take with us during this process. I ask that you be with each and every one of us, guide and protect us, and be with us throughout this journey. This, O Lord, I pray through your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you all.